more than that. So we're there, we're live. Okay. So, hey, listen, Mark Arnold, and wait, Dr. Mark Arnold. And I love saying that because folks like you, who I have done some research on, they earn that, right? They earn that. They went to school and they worked through a lot of things to get that Dr. Arnold, and I'm proud of it, and I'm proud of being with you as you speak today. So I've got a couple of things, and I've got a couple of things that I typically do, Mark, before we have a conversation, and I go through some slides. I know our people in the back are there. Am I bringing my slide up properly? There you go, and hopefully it'll work for me like it typically does. So today, this is Cyversity's Engage's Impact Interview Series, and today we're having a conversation with Mark Arnold. In the past couple of weeks, I've just been putting some posts up about what we'll discuss and what we'll talk about, but also we'll get to that. But in the meantime, I just wanted to let you guys know this is Cyversity, our Impact Interview Series. And as an organization, we've been around for about 10 years. And over time, we've been bridging the gap between folks that are interested in getting into cybersecurity through consistent representation for women, traditionally underrepresented communities, and minorities and communities, and veterans. This is a tough industry to get into, and so what we do here at Cyversity is to work to empower, to educate, and to diversify, and get folks into this industry, because it's a tough industry to get into, and we do that because we feel that when you're battling or dealing with or conversing with folks that are not ethical technologists, we need a whole diverse cornucopia of individuals to deal with that, right? So diversity is a really needed and critical part of cybersecurity, and that's something that we focus on here at Cyversity. Cyversity, we're a membership organization, so for any of you that are in the audience that is not a member and you wanted to become a member, here's an opportunity. You scan this QR code and it takes you right to the membership page. It gives you an opportunity to fill out a form there, discuss some of the things that you're interested in, that you're in need of, especially if you're trying to migrate to this industry. And so this QR code will help you do that. Like most organizations, membership organizations, there is a membership fee, which you do here. And we started in 2022 with a paid membership. And the professionals like Mark and myself pay $100 a year to support the organization, and students are able to join for $20 a year. And like most organizations that are membership organizations, there are benefits. And in this case, Cyversity, there's a multiple of benefits. Some of those benefits represent themselves in scholarships. And I could say that scholarships, over the past 10 years, we've given out quite a few scholarships. Some are directly to the student for their books, for their lodging, for their classes, tuition, and things of that nature. And some of them are for some of our training partners who, like Intuit or Google, who have trainings that may have a fee associated with them. We also have mentorship programs, and those mentorship programs are like 16-week programs. It could either be one-on-one, or it could be a part of a whole group of individuals where you're being mentored. And that's critical. Mentorship is critical in the journey for cybersecurity. So we think mentorship is really critical, and it's one of our flagship offerings here at Cyversity. We also have chapters. We have multiple chapters throughout the country. I happen to be in Austin, Texas, and we have a chapter here that is about 3 months old and growing and absolutely blowing up. And so we're really proud of having chapters, being a part of the Cyversity chapter program and chapter body. We've also got multiple events similar to this one, similar to our end of the year conferences, or in this case, we'll be going to some regional conferences. The next conference that's coming up that's most critical and most pivotal is the RSA conference out in San Francisco. RSA is one of the largest conferences, security conferences on the planet. There's a ton of things that go on there that are of interest, and Cyversity has an entire day at RSA focused on and dedicated to Cyversity. It's one of the things that we've strived for, because Cyversity in its original form, the international consortium of cybersecurity professionals, was created, if not incubated, at RSA over 10 years ago. So RSA is one of our foundational platforms where we talk about who we are and what we do. And so, you know, it's fitting that we have a Cyversity Day at RSA. We've also got on-demand training, and probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, requirement for Cyversity members is networking, because it's through that network that you begin to find partners. And something Mark and I were talking about yesterday is, I'll use the word sponsorship, because there are some people that you know that are sponsoring you, some people that you don't know that are sponsoring you. I think one of our partners, one of our founding members, Yanesi Feliciano, at our last conference had a session on sponsorship, how to develop it, how to design it, how to get it, and how do you know you have it. So I'll move on to our topic areas. It's career development, spotlight, training, transition, leadership, and tech talk. And we also have, we also highlight several times of the month where there are particular highlight events in our community, security community. See, from February to December, it's Black History Month, Women's History Month, Asian American Pacific Islander Month, and you can, and June is LGBTQ and Pride Month, and you can see the rest as we go down the list. Of course, this is going to be about a 45-minute session. Sometimes it runs longer. I already warned Mark about that. Sometimes it runs longer because we have a lot of questions in the background in the chat where people are going to be placing their questions. So at the end of the session, we will have a opportunity to have Q&A. So, you know, if you have questions, please put them there. And next month, we're going to be having a discussion on DEI, where it is, where it's going, how it's developing, how it's growing, how it's shrinking, or what have you. At this point, I'm going to back out of here, remove this from stage. Got Mark, it's you and I. Great, man. Thanks for being here, man. Really appreciate the time that you'll be spending with us today. Looking forward to hearing more about you in this conversation. In typical fashion, we usually go through this in a couple of different phases. First phase is let's hear about Mark, because you know, like I said, I'm one of the Mark fan team. There's many of us, by the way. We usually go through that and have a conversation about who Mark is. The reason I do that, Mark, is because there are many folks in our audience, or many folks that are in Cyversity, who are going through their various phases, even challenges, or what have you, in cybersecurity. And when you get an opportunity to see someone like you and me that looks a lot like them, the commonality of our experiences comes through in the conversation. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to spend as much time as you need to just talk about Mark Arnold, Dr. Mark Arnold, the educational accolades, the technology accolades, and then we'll get into some of the subjects that you and I talked about in depth. So I'm going to step back for a minute and just give you, Mark Arnold, an opportunity to introduce yourself to our audience.
Okay. So my name, again, is Mark Arnold. I am currently working at a security boutique called Laris Consulting, LLC. Laris is a longtime member in the security research community, DEF CON. If folks are aware, DEF CON community, a few of our founders were instrumental in starting B-Sides. So they've been quote unquote hackers, red teamers for a while. I'm there leading the advisory practices. So as we're helping folks understand the maturity of their information security programs, we're building those practices. So our guys go in doing all types of penetration, red team, purple team testing, and then we help mature those programs. That's the end of maybe 20. That's at the end of 20 years of being in the industry. It's not how I started. How I started was through a reference from a fraternity brother. I'm a member of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. I'd be remiss if I didn't shout that out. but found a job at a little hotel because they thought I had a technical background. My undergrad is in electrical engineering at Stanford University. But here I was in a hotel downtown Boston, and I walked in there the first day. They gave me a system on which sat the payroll, a single system, and no one was getting paid that day because the system was down, a single computer. And from that point on, kind of launched this asymmetrical trajectory into security. So being here in Boston, there was a very well-known hacker syndicate group here called the Loft Hacking Crew. The Loft Hacking Crew became a formal business entity called At Stake. There was a gentleman at my church there who's best friends with my mom, and through that connection, which we see in security, David just mentioned the challenges and the hurdles it takes to get into the industry. Sometimes it's just pure fortune, but sometimes it's who you know. And it was through At Stake that I got into the cybersecurity industry, not knowing that these were some of the world's best hackers at the time. And so that's how aloof I was. And so there were some stumbles even at that state in my career at Stake. Actually had to leave that consultancy and find my way elsewhere. There's a long story about how we circled back to those folks, but this path is not without some failure. Sometimes you have to fail to succeed. And so that was my intro into cyber. Was out there also at the same time doing my dissertation. And so that and finding another organization to kind of relaunch my career was what happened here in the Boston area. Again, 20 plus years later, here we are at Laris, having been both a security architect, security engineer, director of security, even CISO. Now back full circle into a consultancy, leading that consultancy. We have a lot of interesting experiences, to say the least, about what one's particular path might look like in security. Everyone's path is unique to them, to their journeys, and so I think it's important for us to share those diverse journeys, and I think that's why we're here today, to discuss some of that. And I'm not sure if we lost David or not. And so while we're waiting on David to come back on, I think one of the reasons that we're here today is to talk about how we help others with their paths into security. And so that's a lot of what is going on in my life at this current point in time, is to help others is to advocate for others, to help them find their agency. And here's David back with us again.
Well, for some reason I was in the background and not able to talk to you, but so happy to be back. I've been listening to your discussion about who you are and where you've come from and how you've gotten to where you are. We were talking about the fact that this is the journey itself has many different sort of loopholes and challenges to it.
Ups and downs, yeah.
And it's and it could be extremely challenging, especially for folks who go through whatever measure of training that they go through, just to get to the point where there is not an opportunity. And so we're faced with the whole challenge of how do we go through this cyclical process of starting from nowhere, going through that whole evolutionary cycle of developing training and education, getting hands-on experience, knowledge, capability, and skills, and then certifications, if not education, to take you through that process. And so some of our conversations are about what stops that. And of course, the term that you used in one of our conversations was advocacy, which is something that Cyversity does, and we're both a member of Cyversity. Advocacy, on the one hand, to spend a lot of time or spend time talking about and advocating for, and then it's the agency part, right? Because the agency happens to have some foundational practicality to it.
Sure.
And so you've been involved in advocacy as well as agency. There's a lot of lecturing that you do on the subject of trying to get folks through this whole process, migrating and the journey. What can you tell us about what you've seen, what you've experienced? Right, you've experienced some of this stuff yourself. So
I think with I always bring up the at-stake conversation, because those are the premier hackers out at the time, them and Foundstone, a few others out there. And for me, I, just very publicly saying I was, kind of embarrassed by the fact that I kind of failed with that first opportunity. I'm very critical of myself. I would consider myself a high achiever from an academic perspective. So thinking, very academic focused, you can read a book, Mark, and you'll be able to master that practice. And to have a situation where, your first big opportunity, it ends up in a less than optimal outcome, you start to think poorly of yourself. But there's rebound. And so the rebound for me, when I always tell other folks who are trying to get in to the industry now, is find a community. We've been talking about Cyversity here. The community I found in Boston was Boston OWASP community. I was like, if you all are going to kind of keep me out of your peer groups, I'm going to find my own peer group. I'm going to re-educate, reset, jumpstart this career that I've found. And it was with OWASP that I became a chapter leader in Boston. For those who don't know OWASP, it was back then the Open Web Application Security Project. It's now the Open Worldwide Application Security Project, because it's everything, right? It's not just web, it's API, it's mobile, it's AI, so it's everything. But it was in that community that I, as a chapter leader, that I started being the recruiter for lecturers to come to those events. It drew me closer into the DEF CON community. So from Boston out to Vegas and what we call summer camp right now. Now we're going to Black Hat, DEF CON, and B-Sides is being launched. And so you're finding what the community consists of. It's not just those decision makers who are saying yay or nay to your role, but you're finding the practitioners who have other networks. And so it's in community that my career found life again. And so that's, David, you asked me yesterday, when you have folks who come up to you and asking, how do we get into the industry? The first thing that comes out of my mouth is community, and Cyversity is usually the top of my list in terms of which community to get connected to, so that you now are a part of a network of like-minded individuals that are trying to provide avenues of advocacy. So we're advocating to get those folks agency in an industry that, as you mentioned, sometimes is tough to break into.
Sure. And your particular background, educational background, focused on a lot of things that were not only technical, but also Afrocentric. And so I'm wondering if that Afrocentricity sort of led you down the path of some of the things that you lecture about, which happens to be the connectivity. Oh, well, I'm going to let you speak on it.
So Afrocentricity is very core to my path, and actually my wrestling with it. So as a church boy growing up in church, had the, I'll just say it's the indoctrination of a very fundamental church, and someone had the audacity to introduce me to Greek. So I self-taught myself Greek, New Testament Greek, and then that was not enough for me. Started learning Hebrew, so I self-taught Hebrew. Long short, my father was taking me around to historically black colleges and universities around the early 90s. And so one of those university tours led us to actually Temple, not an HBCU, but Temple is the sector for Afrocentrism. And there was a gentleman there who actually came out of the church I grew up in. His name is now Mulifi Asante. He's been at Temple for a while. And so they had this whole Afrocentric Institute. I thought I was going to be an Egyptologist because here I am doing Hebrew. I've had 3 years of hieroglyphics. And so I'm definitely going to end up as the Black Indiana Jones out in the desert. At the same time, as I'm doing all these languages, I'm also doing the technology. So there was a parallel path, technology and languages. The reason that Afrocentrism piece is important is because I had a coming to head of sorts with scholarship. So maybe folks will say, well, Mark was trained in those Eurocentric academies, but it was, language is language. And so some of the things that my approaches to studying language butted heads with what I was seeing in that institute. And so this sparked this whole notion of, let me do more languages. Let me, had some trips to Israel, so that Israel becomes a part of that conversation, traveling to Egypt, being on the ground, looking at original sources of documentation, staying in monasteries in the middle of the Sinai Desert, seeing things that folks don't normally see out in the world, and that all of that's in the milieu of Middle Eastern politics, Middle Eastern conflicts. And so first as being was just being a technologist, but now bringing all of this contextual layers of what makes us nations, what makes us either militant or likable to each other. This all led to the connective tissue between cybersecurity and cyber war, and how do we keep peace on this how can we say this global ball that we call Earth. And so bringing all of that academic experiences and information to bear has brought me to this point of intersection now. I used to be just head down cybersecurity, make sure we don't get breached. That's a whole nother conversation about facing APTs and those experiences. But it used to be just, keeping companies safe, making bosses happy, keeping us off front pages, to now where I've matured to a point where it's not just about cybersecurity, but it's also about cyber safety. And for me in particular, cyber safety of our communities. Yes, I live out in the sticks, but my community is in inner city Boston, underserved communities in that city, underserved workers and folks who are trying to make it. All of these layers have been the driving forces for me to be some type of advocate in some way or some degree. So,
would you say that your experience and your worldview has given you a perspective of what's going on this side of the track and that side of the track, and you've seen both of them in play and in action? And would you say that your worldview has given you that perspective, that honest reality perspective?
Absolutely has. I mean, I was in Tel Aviv even just last summer for Cyber Week. I was at B-Sides Tel Aviv. I'm the only Black person basically in the room. And I know some of the speakers who were there, but it's just I think before this conflict on October 7th that we are all now caught up in, right? We have the just yesterday sweeping across our campuses, the Gaza protest. Right here on my desk, I have a book right in front of me as we speak called Israel and the Cyber Threat. I have, I think all of these combined have changed what I thought I wanted to do in cybersecurity, right? I'm not military. I'm not part of one of the 3-letter agencies, but there are some things that we can do from our seat and from our perspective, especially the intersection of these worldwide worldviews and these local events that are triggered by things that are happening on the world stage, and that we could do something about it in our communities.
When you say the intersection between what goes on globally and what goes on in communities like the community I was sort of raised in, which is Brownsville, Brooklyn. I always
Sure.
shout out Brownsville. I'm from the Ville. But the reality is those communities where folks like I come from are also being affected in adverse ways by
Absolutely.
this intersectionality and this disinformation. Right?
Absolutely.
And then, of course, there are mechanisms in place to keep it that way. And so, like you say, when I got disconnected briefly, you were talking about the fact that what we're here for today, and in this Impact interview series, is to talk about how do we make sure that all of the populations that Cyversity serves, women, underserved communities, veterans, minorities of every stripe and kind, individuals, all of the others, as they say, in all of the others, that they're getting an opportunity to get access. And so what I'd like to sort of turn our conversation to is the who, what, where, and why, and then of course at the end of the conversation, the how to deal with this, the who, what, where, why of how our communities are being adversely affected by this intersectionality and conflict and disinformation.
Sure. We actually gave a talk at the last Cyversity annual conference called Power Up. I gave a conversation. I struck up a conversation with the 25 minutes that I had to talk about how our communities get caught up in the gray zone warfare. So it's like war without war. So war without kinetic effect. And one of my wonderful fraternity brothers, Dr. Reginald Brothers, he was the deputy undersecretary at both the Pentagon and at DHS. Before that, he was at DARPA. I actually brought this up on a call yesterday. The DARPA conversation is very interesting because here he is leading one of the technical innovative incubators at DARPA, and he was boss of one of the guys at AtStake. I mentioned AtStake in my introductory remarks. Famous hacker called Mudge. So my fraternity brother was Mudge's manager, for lack of a better words. But here are two worlds: a hacker. Dr. Brothers is concerned about kinetic effects, right? So he's building networks. We're building networks and buildings, with cables, right? Cat 5, Cat 6 cables. He's building networks between flying aircraft. That's what Dr. Brothers. That's what his research was in, right? in a theater of war. So he's thinking about what's coming on down the line. What are the potential military approaches, in these conflict theaters. And there was one talk he was receiving an award here in Boston. We all went there, and his focus was on gray zone warfare. Warfare without all of this kinetic effect, without dropping missives, without dropping bombs, what have you. And in the gray zone, that's where we see disinformation and misinformation. Okay. It was just before COVID in 2019 that I was between gigs. We talk about the path. So I'm out of work at this point. I buy a ticket to DC, and I said, when I get there, I'll find a conference to go to. That conference ended up being CyberWarCon. It is my favorite conference of all. I know we talk about RSA, but I've got to get to CyberWarCon every year. It's at CyberWarCon that I was introduced to Renee DiResta. She was a keynote in 2019, and she gave a talk called Chimera. Chimera is the three-headed mythological beast. And what she was showing us was that there were three Russian information ops going on in the world, and one of them was actually targeting Black Lives Matter groups. In fact, they had an account takeover of one of those groups, and they were using that group's platform on Facebook to gather sentiment around the causes for that group. And what was beginning to happen was the nation state agency behind that was basically setting up rallies around the countries tied to this group. So the rallies weren't real rallies, but folks who consume Facebook like us, our folk and other folk, consume the disinformation that was coming out of that particular account. and found themselves at these events where you have folks on both sides opposing each other. Something that started off as just an information operations now potentially spun up into something kinetic, right? Because now you have all this anger and hostility in a physical location, which prior to were just us, a bunch of us consuming, hitting like on the post, fomenting this hostility. And here we are caught in the crosshairs of the gray zone, being manipulated by these nation state actors. And so that was kind of the premise of my talk, to make us aware, to talk about that intersection of both cyber and cyber war, and then how we can either get involved, become better advocates, or even get some of our folks into the field where they're actually doing the cyber safety, part, right? Not just cybersecurity, but how do we ensure that we are controlling our own narrative and not being influenced by false narratives?
So, we may think that social media is a safe zone, but what you're saying is that among other things, among nation states that are focused on creating these schisms between us here in this country, they focus on particular platforms that have influence. And that influence in turn turns folks in a different way, and it creates constant conflict. How do we see? Well, if you've got more to offer on that, please do.
I was going to say, I wish I had Dr. Brother's slide. Basically shows that, right? It shows the states of war from the 1950s up until now, and on the current portion of that slide, you have all the platforms there being weaponized. And as you were talking, I was triggered because right in front of me I have another book by Peter Singer called Like War, and it's called The Weaponization of Social Media. I think that's the awareness part. The awareness part is to give us agency to understand. I know there are a lot of, we're starting to become more knowledgeable about what we click on, what we're not supposed to click on, but just the fact that these platforms are being weaponized. These are where the sentiments are being exploited to be weaponized and then amplified to be consumed by greater and broader audiences.
So firstly, I just want to say for those in the audience that are listening, if you have questions, don't hesitate to put them in the chat. We'll definitely address them, and we'll definitely go through them. And just come forward with any question that you have on the subject of on the broadest subject on how do we find our way into the security industry safely and successfully. Right? And so that's really, in a sense, what Mark and I are talking about here today.
And can I just hook on to that? Because I think that was the goal of my talk at Cyversity. It was yes about awareness of the problem, but also to provide maybe another way into the industry. So we want people to be in SOC. We want people to be either security engineers or security architects or application security practitioners. At CyberWorldCon, we're seeing more folks that look like us who are working at Microsoft, who are working on the Google incident response teams, working at those firms, doing this type of work. At one point, I'm gonna point you to a young brother, maybe just 25, who presented at this last CyberWorldCon on the Israeli-Gaza conflict, maybe days after everything launched. And so I think one of my goals was to say, here's another avenue in, if this is what interests you. I have brothers who spent years in the military. They've got strong intelligence backgrounds, and sometimes we just, here's a SOC path. Here's here's an engineering path. Well, you've spent years in intelligence. Here's another pathway into the industry that might be of interest to you. So it was also more about awareness, and here's another path of agency if this is what you like to do, because more of us are starting to do it.
Sure. Initially, we were talking about the sort of the global nation states, but there are things right here, and there are things right here in our country.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Don't let me stop you, Mark.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Because we were talking about, hey, look, globally there are sort of initiatives and missions and nation states that are trying to adversely affect our country and our cultural disposition here in America.
I like that.
But also, right here in America, there we're experiencing and we see challenges from conservative groups, from progressive groups. Talk about what you've seen and heard in those realms.
Here you go. So I think one of the things we've talked about in recent weeks is, we call it the rise of Christian nationalism or white Christian nationalism. I mentioned to you in the last month that I had opportunity to find my home again among Stanford Black alumni. We just recently had a reunion, number 6 in New Orleans, and I became aware of a book that was just released by Lerone Martin called "The Gospel of Hoover." If anyone knows Hoover, he's had a very interesting relationship with our communities. I'm going to say our communities, targeting folks like Dr. King and Malcolm X. And what Dr. Martin has been able to get a hold of some of his private letters, where he was somehow very entrenched in evangelical circles, even in the 1950s, early 60s. He was even using the FBI to go after Bible translators. Biblical translations is the thing that I do on that parallel path. And so here's a gentleman who's got the power of the FBI, concerned that someone changed a few words in the book of Isaiah, and sends the FBI, like he sent against Dr. King, against these translators. And so what Dr. Martin begins to show us in his book is how, and I didn't realize this until a few months ago, that Hoover was on some of the early, he was basically writing segments for evangelical Christianity Today, the big one, CT. Here's Hoover. He's not a pastor. He's not a preacher. This is the director of the FBI being propped up. And what Martin begins to show us is that what we're seeing, the fruits of what we're seeing, the manifestations of this racial discord through religious circles, starts very early on with Hoover being lifted up, being propped up by ministers in the 50s and the 60s. And now we're starting to deal with that. It did come up at the Stanford event, because I was there moderating a spirituality panel. We're talking about the ways of meditation, prayer, what have you. And I hope this is not going too far flung, but in the midst of that, someone raised a question about, what about spirituality and disinformation? And then my ears peaked because that intersection is in the minds of folks who are doing this work. Stanford right now is just launching the Institute of Race this fall. We have maybe $5 to $10 million invested in getting that launched off the ground. Hoover Institute, the conservative institute, has nearly $500 million being used for that research to spin up and support conservative narratives. Not saying that all of us are liberal. I mean, obviously our community is mixed. We have conservatives and liberals, but I'm just saying, here we are in just 2024, spinning up this new institution to have some counter narratives to kind of govern and maintain our own narrative functions, and understand, what these larger movements have to do with the safety and the prosperity of our communities.
Interesting. And listen, our conversations have been great conversations about we can identify all of the challenges and the problems. I mean, it's easy because they're so evident and they're so prevalent. But we've also had some conversations as forward thinkers or solution thinkers about what's the solution. This is where the advocacy and this is where the agency comes in, whether it's agency from from individuals that are cognizant of our communities' in the population that we serve of their plight or agency or self-agency, which you think is we think it, you and I are thinking self-agency is probably just as critical as any agency about what is it that we do for ourselves. We were talking about a young man that went through, you know, a significant amount of training and education, and then ran into challenges. Let's talk about his journey for a second, if you will. Let's talk about this young man that you were working with and mentoring. Yes.
I won't call his name, but I do call him the Black Rambo. I mean, he actually did a lot of things that we see in the film. He's a very dangerous brother, but a very persistent brother, also a fraternity brother, new fraternity brother. And here he is, you know, going, you know, trying to make the transition from you know, that former life in the military into civilian life, you know, going through all the hurdles that he was told to go through, go to school, do, you know, spend the 18 months to go through the classroom piece. And then he needed just a simple internship to complete the program to graduate. It took us 18 months to get him a small seat in a small opportunity not too far from here. But the concern for me was it took us 18 months of us advocating, right? We had conversations about him prior to him landing this small role to get in this small pocket of agency. And my concern was, and you and I have had these conversations, you know, as we skill people up, build up their resumes, drive up their, you know, their references and their, you know, their images within, you know, those who have, you know, roles and are decision makers to get them seated. Why is the journey so long for someone like that who served this country and has done the grunt work? And, you know, after 18 months, we can only get him that internship, and probably not the best one, but again, it's part of the journey. And so we were talking about some of the challenges, you know, with that, where folks have great hearts and say, you know, we want to help our veterans, we want to do X, Y, and Z, but then you tell me, well, let's post something on LinkedIn and see who helps. Well, we've got to have something more intentional than just hoping for that. We want to make these paths more strategic and more practical after coming, you know, through these programs and getting them the agency that they deserve.
Absolutely. So from that experience with this young man, are there what you would consider lessons learned and solutions to deliver, or are there two solutions that you came upon out of this experience with this veteran? That, you know, which is also
I would say one of the experiences I would say is find I would say issues with some of the recruiting shops. You can't advocate and say that we're a placement firm for veterans, and then when we bring the veterans to you, it's like we'll put it out there in the universe to see if we can find something. And so maybe that was one of the blocks, finding a not just a reputable recruiting firm, but a recruiting firm that has measurable results that shows that if we bring this person to you, you're able to do something with that person. I would say in the last few months, I found a small technical college outside of Western Massachusetts, and their pipeline is a pipeline that actually works. And I wish I had found that pipeline first, because some of these pipelines do exist. They may not exist as I'm noticing, in the big sectors like Boston. It's like we get lost in Boston, you know, trying to, you know, get folks in the system. And here is a small mill town out in Western Mass with a small technical college that's moving people from classroom to internship to positive employment. And that's what we want to see.
Absolutely. This university, or the small college that we talked about, has a particular tool that they use to do training and education, and that training and education in sort of a cyber range, if you will, sort of conversation.
Well, they're going to be the second cyber range of its type in Massachusetts. We just had a company cyber trust build one at another predominantly. It's a school that's predominantly attended by people of color. I'll give the name Bridgewater State University. They launched their cyber range there. I love it there because my dad's cousin, my dad-in-law's cousin, my late dad-in-law's cousin, used to be the president there. So we have a lot of Cape Verdeans who attend there. But the others, it's a college now that we can use to say we're not just speaking it with our mouths, but we're providing opportunities on site to actually use that setup to diversify the market even better with a better strategy. The college that I referenced in Western Massachusetts, there'll be that second there'll be the second spot for the cyber range to get that off the ground and running.
So this whole, like I said, you and I have gone through what we consider to be the problems. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier, just earlier in your last statement, was about recruiters. And this is one of the things Cyversity is working on. And it's to be relational at all phases, at all levels.
Absolutely.
And being relational at the ground level or foundational level, and being relational at the executive level, or even the board level. Because if we're relational there, then we have the means to have access to get folks past that first initial conversation where 90% of the people are already excluded.
It's not just a name, right? Right.
And I had a conversation with a recruiter, and he was telling me about the process and the procedures, and he was giving me some ideas and facts about what to do and how to get around it. What have you come across in the process? And there's a question that goes back to your technical background.
We'll get to it.
We're going to get to it in a second. But what have you seen as one of the things that folks should do around self-agency to help build their career, develop their career, and get their career on that path, so that at the end of the day, come hell or high water, you fail fast, but you still succeed? What do you think is a good mechanism or a good approach to success for folks that are coming into and navigating through this industry? And thanks for the questions. We're going to get to them, I promise you.
I'm gonna go back to community, not just Cyversity, but even if it's whatever local communities that exist, B-sides, OWASP, or just if you're into coding, Python, go join the Python community. Get involved in any local conferences. So just recently, you saw my post not too long ago where I'm involved as a time-to-time mentor for the cyber warrior cohorts. Mm-hmm. And so this time I said, well, I've got a conference that I help run. Let's get everybody on site. Everyone's talking about, how do we get into the community? How do we get in front of people who are the decision makers? I'm like, here's a small conference to ease your way into. We're not dropping you in the middle of RSA conference. Here's a local conference. They all went. They had not met each other heretofore until they got there on that site that day. They served in registration. They volunteered in the talk rooms. Monitored talks, listened to lectures, met vendors, met other people, and it was eye-opening for them. Not having been doing everything online, virtual. They're going through all the training. They're going through all CH, what have you, security essentials, to actually be in the room with cybersecurity professionals and in the community of folks live. Now they have that gave them some agency. I know it gave them some agency because maybe 2 weeks later they were talking about going to the next conference. Mm-hmm. And so we started something just by that small invite. And I can say that most of my long-lasting relationships have started in the Black Hat DEF CON OWASP community,
Right.
and being exposed to vendors, being exposed to decision makers. I think it's very important to surround yourself with that, in addition to this pursuit of just the education. I've been an academic. I've had black hats on my team. I mean, real black hats, not play around black hats, but black hats with no education, but could maybe have but probably get a PhD at MIT because they've been knee deep in it. And so everyone's path is a little bit different. But I can say the common denominator for that black hat, for myself and for others, is that they found some type of community to be a part of, and you use that community to attach to other communities and find greater agency.
Right, and the other thing that I just will mention briefly that Cyversity talks about is that, yes, it's technical. The technical attributes are what we're focused on, but there are other skills that are required in corporate America and in the military and in general public. Those things being recruiters. I mean, if we're talking about recruitment, we should be recruiters so we can influence that market. Also in business development, education, and entrepreneurialism. These are some of the things that Cyversity is really focused on bringing to the top of the table so that we do have the agency. And back to your point, Mark, agency that's necessary and required to help get our folks through. I'm going to take a couple of questions.
Sure.
I'm going to go to the bottom right now and say, Tabitha, thanks very much for that comment, right? You're right. This is a very, this is what Cyversity and the Impact Interview Series is about. It's about having an open, honest conversation, one that has solutions at the end of the day. I mean, because we can all complain all day, and thank you for attending. I'm going to go back up to the top where we have Dio. And by the way, Dr. Arnold, by the way, Dr. Arnold, Dio is from Uganda.
I see.
From Uganda, right?
Awesome,
now.
Awesome.
Right, and so
I had a friend who's responsible for Hackers for Charity, and was in Uganda for a long time doing work on the ground there. Yeah,
and Dio is a loyal follower or a loyal audience member, not a follower. He's a loyal audience member. He's got his own podcast, by the way. He don't need me at all. So Dio's question is, how do you keep an organization in the banking industry, safe from nation state actors?
So the biggest part is you need to be threat intel forward, and the way to do that is become a part of one of probably the largest ISAC. Information sharing is important at the end of the day. Banks are probably the five servers. They're going to have the best of breed in solutions and controls. What our team does, we try to defeat millions of dollars of investment with simulation. That's what we do. We do custom trade, and so I think having access to particular tradecraft, and some of that comes only through being a part of certain circles, or having a combination of being in those circles and then going through more of blended testing, red team, purple team, to make sure that you are simulating best of breed of attacks. And so I think it's a combination of those things.
Yep.
I mean, it's hard to answer that in a few seconds, but those are the first two things off the top of my head.
There's so much that we have to talk about. An hour would never be able to do it justice. I actually heard a discussion that you had, Mark, on breaches and compromises, and you were talking about the Capital One breach. You were talking about also NIST and the multiple frameworks and standards that are used to help create the defense, the standardized or the framework for defense that folks should be using. And does that play into the question that Dio
asked? Best practices involves picking the particular frameworks. Again, banking is probably the most regulated field, so they have lots of compliance drivers to align themselves with, and so we expect that out of the box for that industry, because the industry is regulation driven. At the same time, We don't associate compliance with security. So always be testing. Always have a blended approach to testing, and again, access to tradecraft is only going to be found in certain groups that you have to pay to get into for some of that information. I can tell you for just out of experience, I was at a firm, a defense partner supplier, and we got attacked on one day, and that same attacker from China, it was an APT, that attacked us and four other businesses that same week. If we were a part of a sharing organization, we may have been able to get ahead of that attack. We were not. We were one of the least prepared for the attack, and therefore that led us down a rabbit hole that was a very depressing time. I'll just put it that way.
They always, in my days of business development, we always said that being compliant doesn't make you secure, but being secure can definitely make you compliant.
So we've been talking about this in the last few days about, folks getting into these roles, but they don't have any tactical experience. And so I would say it's also important to have some of this tactical experience. This is why we're saying go through the testing phases. Don't be in the role and you're not prepared, as we were. And so it's important to be focused just on the business compliance, what have you, but also that tactical cog is very important. So when it does go down, and it will go down, you're ready to respond.
2 points you just made. Understand the business, because all of what we do in technology really just relates to the business. If there was no business, there would be no need for technology, because we've been doing things on a stone and chisel. So that's the first thing. The other thing is that when it comes to self-agency, be prepared. CISOs, hiring managers, only hire you for what you know and what you can do. The certifications are really just the opportunity to give you the beacon. Hey, I've gone through the academic piece of this, but when you get an opportunity to put your hands on keyboards, know what you're doing. That's self-agency.
Right.
The agency from Cyversity is going to always be there to help you get there, get to that position, get to that opportunity to have the conversation, but be prepared. I wanted to go to this other mark in the time that we got left. And if you got just a couple more minutes for me, please.
I do.
Right. I'm just questions. I'm going to rattle through them. How do we continue to develop current talent and new talent when most of the big training organizations, CompTIA, and I know them well, I see Squared and others only put emphasis on obtaining certifications. And Mark, you know this statement I already make: the people that make the most, that get the most out of certifications, the people that give them. So I'm not against certifications.
It is a business, so
absolutely. So your answer to the person that asked that question.
So I always try to lowball. When I hear that question, I always try to say, to some degree, there's a way to lowball some of those big organizations. Things like Try Hack Me or even Bandit to gamify. If you just want to play around with breaking authentication, there are free tools out there. We probably need to list these somewhere at some point. Even OWASP has broken web apps. We've got Juice Bar. Those are all free, and you can work through them. There are write-ups all over the web for these, on Medium, for Bandit, for the Bandit game. There are write-ups. Try Hack Me, for me, it's like $50. You can go in there and determine what your path is going to be and actually be working in spaces. And there are some competing. There are some at a higher tier than that is doing some of the same work, but to kind of lowball it, always target those free tools. We probably need to, like I said, David and I could compile some of those offline, but that's a way before you're getting all the IRC Square, ISACA, and the like. It's kind of a way to get around some of that immediate hurdles.
Yeah, and so look, I'm going to continue with the questions, but I got something I want to post I want to have our back office post in the chat there so folks can get an opportunity to contact you through LinkedIn. You okay with that?
That's fair.
Absolutely. And then of course I think we should probably have a follow-up conversation in a couple of months, but the docket is booked, but we should have another conversation with you in a couple of months about a follow-up to this conversation, because like next month we're going to be talking about DEI, and there's some stuff in there for you, for us as well in that conversation with you. DOS, again, tell us what cyber clinics, and tell us about cyber clinics and how they can benefit individuals getting started in cybersecurity.
So I think Deals is in Uganda, and so I'm not sure what's on the ground there, but typically we're looking at smaller cons. B-Sides, for instance, has its own mentorship built in. Again, the price point is smaller than, say, at other resources, other locations. If there are any local OWASP events, those have to be free, so that except for the major conferences and some of the training. But again, just getting exposed to some of those smaller events locally. We can post later on. There's a website that has all of the local cons across the world, and it's pretty well maintained. And so we'll find that as well as part of the requests that are coming in.
Right.
I can't see a way to post here, so I just posted.
Yeah, I just asked them in the back chat to our back office to put all of this stuff in the chat that they can, so that folks can see it. Tabitha, again, thank you for your comment. Anthony Murphy, I just found Python course. This is awesome. This is Anthony sharing. Question: what is a reliable, from O. Miles Johnson? What is a reliable source to find information on nation states, especially the ones that you mentioned, or like the actors that you mentioned? Please.
So I did post something in the private chat that hopefully they can put in the main chat window. When we say reliable, it's a free source, so you have to be careful about what information you're drawing from it. But the person who maintains it, he is verified and trusted resource in the intelligence space, and so they just posted it there. Again, trust. I would say don't trust and always verify, but you can get an idea of who the actors are in that APT groups and operations sheet. It's free, but again, it's not some of the stuff that you're going to see at NSA or some of the other three-letter agencies doing that work. But this is helpful. Also, I would mention the MITRE attack framework. I'm not sure if we mentioned that today yet. So even though they're not going to label who the actors and nation state actors are, what you're seeing there are the simulations of tradecraft or pathways that they are aware of, that they've been curating. And so that's another way to think about, how folks are getting into systems, applications, organizations, and the like. So we can post the MITRE attack framework in there somewhere as well.
So this conversation, and I just wanted to give everyone sort of a broad brush of what we did here. We started out with an introduction to Mark, so that he could stand on the conversation that he was going to be, or the comments that he was going to be giving to us. Then we had this global perspective of what's happening globally. We narrowed it down to what's happening locally, and that's all the problems. And then we started talking about, the advocacy and agency and self-agency. At the end of the day, Mark, two things I wanted to ask you, but I know you're getting ready to say something, but I'll remember my questions.
No, okay.
The first thing is that if you had to suggest a book for the folks that are listening, a book or two books, let's hear your books.
Wow. So someone's interested in the online investigative piece, some of the talks that we see at CyberWorkCon. There's a book called We Are Bellingcat, BELLINGCAT. They're doing some of that work. If you're interested in some of the work on information operations campaigns altogether, I would point you to the Stanford Internet Observatory. There you'll find a lot of the narratives and stories that they're working on that talk about kind of what we were discussing earlier on, some of the broad operation campaigns that they're seeing happening globally. Those are the two along those lines. I have here also Like War by P.W. Singer, which talks about the weaponization of social media platforms.
Say that again. Like war?
Like war. LIKEWAR. It was brought to our attention during our time at Harvard Kennedy School cohort on intersection of policy and cyber. So that's an important book.
Incredible. Parting comments to the. Well, here's one question. What would you? Here's one question before I let you give that parting statement. So, Mark's what, 42 today? Mark 39, 40, something like that.
Okay.
Mark, something like that. Yeah, this is the older 40-something-year-old Mark. What would that older 42-year-old Mark say to that younger 25-year-old Mark when Mark was getting started? Anything different? Anything change? What would Mark say?
Find supportive peers and a mentor. For some of us, we've kind of been stumbling along, building it as we climb. Even on both sides, on both my parallel tracks, technology and linguistics. Find a mentor that's going to be a Sherpa earlier on than later on. I think that's key. If that's my single statement, that's key to my earlier self.
Personal board of directors.
Absolutely.
Personal board of directors. And believe me, you're not only looking for people, I guess, Mark, you're not only looking for people that agree with you.
Agree with you or tell me the truth.
Or tell you the truth. That's it. Parting comments to our group here that, I'm sure there's more people out there, but parting comments that you have.
I would say stay curious. That's, one thing that we harp on for those who are getting into the field or trying to get in. Be curious. Allow yourself to be open to conversations and community. It's my 3 C's, right? Yeah. Curiosity, conversations, and community. That gets you into circles where you can start thinking about how to use your agency and get people, advocate both for yourself, but also find advocators for yourself. So absolutely. That's why Cyversity is important, I think, for us. And I hate to say us because us is diverse, right?
Of course.
Left and right in the middle, but collectively, it's important for us to have those conversations.
Charity starts at home, brother.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, and other folks understand that too, obviously. Right?
Anyway, Mark, man, I just can't tell you. First of all, this is the culmination of a couple of conversations that we have. It's been and it's not obviously it's not the last conversation you and I are going to have just on or off or whatever topics they just come up when we talk.
Sure.
I think other people should have the benefit of, and I think you probably need a platform that you already have a platform because you lecture, right? And you're an adjunct professor.
Yeah.
And you're an ordained minister.
so there's a lot of reasons.
And I'm a PK, so I know what that's all about.
So there's a lot of reason for the advocating. So that fuels the advocacy for sure.
Absolutely. So we appreciate you coming and speaking with us. I don't know what else to say other than thank you all for coming. Those of you who are listening, thank you for your questions. Thank you for your engagement. Our next session will be next month. We'll be talking about DEI, where it is, where it's going, how it got here, what's the status, what's next. There are going to be some very interesting folks who are in the midst of DEI, in the struggle of DEI, in the development of continuing DEI that are going to be on this conversation next month. So please be on the lookout for what's coming, and please come back. Mark, the stage is always open for you to come and speak about what you want to talk about here. And if you want to, bring somebody and do your own interview, have at it.
Appreciate it.
No doubt, man. Thank you again. Hey, that little button on the bottom and with the red square on it, that's the one that says you can leave whenever you want to leave. But thanks again, and thanks everybody for being here. Appreciate it.
Cheers, everyone. All right.
Hey, Carol, can you come up?